Yay, I'm so excited. Thank you everybody for joining our opening session at the EdInnovate Showcase hosted by the Jacobs Institute for Innovation and Education at the University of San Diego and also hosted by the San Diego County Office of Education. So we're very, very excited to welcome our first speaker this morning, Kristina Steen Lyles from Digital Promise, and I'm going to be introducing her. I did want to give you a little bit of information about our format. Steen will be talking for about 20-25 minutes, and then she's going to open up to a question and answer session where she'll take people on the mics. And so during her talk, if you don't mind muting, just so we don't get background noises, that would be really appreciated. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them in text chat. That should be open for everybody. And now I'd like to welcome you. Thank you again for joining us, Steen. We're so honored to have you with us today. So here is her bio. DonorsChoose is the largest, as we all know, crowdfunding nonprofit for public school teachers. And Kristina Steen Lyles leads DonorsChoose efforts to incorporate a race equity forward lens and supporting students and teachers across the country. She led the creation of #ISeeMe, a DonorsChoose initiative, ensuring that students can see themselves reflected in their teachers and in their learning environments. Steen collaborates with companies and foundations committed to racial equity in public schools and is especially passionate about growing relationships with philanthropists of color, hoping to make an impact for students and teachers. Prior to joining DonorsChoose, Steen practiced corporate law. Before that, she taught street law to high school students in the DC public school system. Steen graduated from Spelman College and Georgetown Law and loves all things related to cheerleading, Atlanta, dance, and coffee. Steen is the proud mama of 2 little humans and a rescue pup. So welcome, Steen, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the hearts. I feel like got to shout out my 2 little humans and of course my dog, which in many ways it's a little passive aggressive because really I'm just saying if you hear a dog in the background, thanks for grace because Linux is just downstairs. Okay, let's get started. Thank you so much for having me. I know, so I'm in Atlanta and it is indeed 11:20-ish here. But I know for many of you, if you're on the West Coast or dialing in from different parts of the world, it's just different times of day. So if your video is off, that's a-okay. I hope that you will use the chat, which I can't currently see, but we'll see when we get to Q&A. And also just enjoy really a conversation that I hope to fast forward through a bit so we spend plenty of time just in conversation on ideas that come up or questions that come to mind. So with all of that, let's get started. So welcome again. My name is Christina. I do go by Steen, and I lead the work to make DonorsChoose a force for racial equity in our public schools. I'm really excited to talk about today what we are building at DonorsChoose to make public school education more equitable. So I hope I in many ways intrigued you just a little bit, kind of enticed you in terms of the subject of today's conversation, which is about our journey at DonorsChoose to become more race equity forward in how we impact students and teachers across the country. So if you stop for a minute and think about maybe your own perceptions of inequity in K-12 public schooling, your mind might naturally flow to how our country's legacy and history of racial discrimination, including within education, is playing a role in how equitable or not equitable public school classrooms are today. And so today, I'm going to share with you how our org really got on that journey of combating racial inequity by asking one question of our DonorsChoose teacher audiences. And I'm going to just go ahead and give the spoiler in case folks don't like to wait to the end. What question did we ask? We asked teachers to share with us their race, and they shared their race with us alongside other demographic information. And the result is that nearly 500,000 teachers have done so across our platform. And more than 100,000 of those teachers are teachers of color. So this is the largest email contact list, the largest database of current teachers of color of any organization in the country, and that is growing. So it's not just about us building this email contact list, though. It's about how we use this data to listen to and learn from teachers, especially teachers of color, to help make education more equitable. And one of the groups of teachers that we are uplifting and talking about today are male teachers of color. And I'm not sure from the chat or from later, we'll talk about whether or not in the audience today we have any such male teachers of color. If so, I hope we can uplift your voices. But specifically, we're also going to talk about Black male teachers. In fact, at DonorsChoose, we recently launched an initiative where thousands of teachers answered some in-depth survey questions about what they're experiencing in the classroom. And we devised survey questions that we wanted to explore. And we worked alongside racial equity leaders like Dr. Travis Bristol. I imagine for folks in California, that name is familiar. He's over at UC Berkeley. And Sharif El-Mekki from the Center for Black Educator Development. And that survey resulted in us learning about the unique impact of Black men in the teaching profession. So before we dive into those insights, let's talk about where are we going today? I always joke whenever I take an exercise class, I need the instructor to tell me, we're going to start with warm up, we're going to go here. And so here's the roadmap. I'm not going to read it to you, but this is how we're going to start. And we're going to talk about first how this all began. Okay, so I do want to back up in case folks are not familiar with DonorsChoose and talk about who we are and what is a DonorsChoose, right? Our mission at DonorsChoose is to get resources into public school classrooms, right? So we believe that a student's race nor their zip code should dictate whether or not they have access to the resources that they need for a great education. In fact, we know that access to a great education isn't equitable, and that inequity falls on both socioeconomic and racial lines. So what you see quoted at the bottom of this slide is that one EdBuild study found that school districts that serve students of color get $23 billion less than school districts that serve the same number of white students. And we also know that how much teachers are spending out of their own pockets can tell us a lot about how well or under-resourced a school or a classroom is. So I know all of us are in the ed space or ed innovators or thinking about education. And for anyone who knows a teacher, you probably can think of times in which they've told you they're spending money out of their own pocket to make sure their kids have the things they need. And we commissioned original research at DonorsChoose that shows that teachers are digging into their own pockets more when they work with more students of color. And so then teachers are turning to DonorsChoose. So we are a platform where teachers request the resources that they need, and then our donors fund those requests. So we think that DonorsChoose is an especially valuable, or in an especially valuable position to help the public address education inequity, because at least one teacher in 85% of our America's public schools have posted a classroom project with us. And more than a quarter of those teachers are teachers of color. So we are excited about the teachers that are using our platform are working in the communities that we most want to serve and uplift. Here's how it works for folks who are just joining. We're talking about DonorsChoose and what we do. And teachers request what they need. So maybe it's crayons, maybe it's butterfly cocoons, or maybe it's books and posters with racially representative scientists, you name it. And then we vet those requests that teachers make. And then our partners, we call those are companies or corporations that are our partners, our foundations, and our donors, that's you and me, the individuals, fund those classroom project requests. Whatever inspires them, they fund them. And then what we do is we ship those resources directly to the classroom. And then what happens is that the classroom reports back on how they're using the resources. So if Lisa was a donor on DonorsChoose, she would find a classroom project for those butterfly cocoons. And then when it's all said and done and we've shipped those cocoons to the classroom, Lisa, our donor, receives back cute little note saying, thank you so much, donor Lisa, for these butterfly cocoons. Look how we grew them out and now have a butterfly garden. Since our founder, Charles Best, birthed this organization in the year 2000, more than $1 billion in classroom projects have been funded. And again, we're in well over 80% of our nation's public schools. So all of that is just background on DonorsChoose, right? Background on how we operate, but I kind of now want to nerd out with y'all on the equity road and how we got here. So on the roadmap now, we're down the lane and we're talking about how did we get at DonorsChoose on this path to focusing not just on socioeconomic inequity, but also on race equity. I'm going to give you a second to absorb this slide. So we love data on DonorsChoose, and our data began to tell us something about what teachers were doing in their classrooms. And starting in the year 2016, we noticed this uptick in requests for resources in which students could see themselves. And so we were wondering, what do you mean? What are teachers saying when they need students to see themselves? So teachers were requesting books featuring protagonists of color. They were requesting, for example, classroom posters featuring racially representative scientists or gender inclusivity in science and STEM. We saw kindergarten and preschool classrooms requesting crayons that had more hues of brown and yellow and pink so that preschoolers could better portray themselves when doing these self-portraits. And as you can see, this interest from our teachers is growing over time. And I didn't include 2021 and 2022, but it begins to really be off the charts. So then we listened to teachers and started noticing sort of en masse this classroom project data where teachers were saying we want students to see themselves. And we listened to teachers, but then dug into the research, right? And there is a plethora of research showing the importance of students, especially Black students, seeing themselves represented in their classrooms. So we married these things, this project data and this research, and we launched our first ever diversity and representation campaign across DonorsChoose called #ISeeMe. And I See Me is about students seeing themselves in their teachers and in their learning environments. We rallied other peer equity organizations, we rallied our funders, and it was all around this cause of bringing more resources to, one, teachers of color, but also then teachers of any background requesting resources that reflected their students' identities. And you may notice that in being really mindful of the power of diversity and representation, we also rallied a community of philanthropists, mostly philanthropists of color, on this premise that an initiative about students seeing themselves in their classrooms should also allow them to see themselves in their supporters. And I'm hoping that as you're listening to this, you're recalling even your own educational experiences, K through 12, whenever it was, thinking, when was the first time that I saw myself in a teacher? Was it college? Was it kindergarten? And what was the power of that? And can you still recall it? So I'm curious when we get to discussion if folks can recall those very ideas. And so I'm sharing ISeeMe as a part of this conversation because it is the data made possible from this initiative that has allowed us to reinforce our commitment at DonorsChoose to racial equity in public schools. So what you're seeing on this slide is the drum roll. It's the question, right? It's the question that we asked, the questions really of our teachers to build the largest database ever of teachers of color. And so here's how it worked and here's how that began. When we launched ISeeMe, we launched the new feature that you see on this slide across our site. So you'll see here that pretend you are a teacher and you come across this screen when you're registering on DonorsChoose. So when you register, we are asking you to now share with us optionally and privately your race, your gender identity, whether or not you were the first in your family to graduate from college. We'll ask you to share your college alma mater. So my husband is always looking for Howard, like how can I find a Howard teacher? And the year they began teaching. And since we've launched this feature on our site, we've had more than 400,000 teachers share the demographic information with us, meaning that we're now able to tap into a database of more than 100,000 teachers of color. And it's this mountain of data and really our belief in ed equity that is leading us to this journey of who we want to become as an organization and how we later launched this survey centering male teachers of color and of course, Black male teachers. So all that data that you saw on the previous slides that informed the creation of that diversity initiative called I See Me is now what has informed our newest equity initiative designed to listen to and learn from male teachers of color. So the survey that I'm going to share today and some of the results, and then we're going to open up for some questions. The survey that we'll discuss was completed by thousands of teachers. And so that included not just male teachers of color, right? Because we needed some comparisons. So it included a survey that went out to white teachers, to female teachers of color, as well as to 1,700 male teachers of color. Again, making this one the largest ever survey centering this group. And some of the findings really quantify trends that people, researchers, many of you have been thinking about possibly qualitatively. And I think some of these findings are going to surprise and intrigue you. So I cannot wait to nerd out on these findings and see what you think and what ideas these come up for. So first though, why do we focus on Black male teachers? For one, they are profoundly underrepresented with, I believe from my latest view on NCES, Black male teachers still represent roughly 2% of our country's public school teachers. So what's that 2% identifying as Black men in the classroom? And if you compare that to the number of Black boys, there's certainly a disparity there. And for another, this survey really, the data, as we were drilling into the insights, underscored that the Black male teaching experience, when we were combing and mining through the data, actually rose up as being really unique. So I call all that out to say that there's also one more, maybe not obvious, but really ringing true to me as a part of the reasoning for launching this survey, which was we entered this racial climate where teachers are not only shouldering these disproportionate responsibilities, and I think that really rings true in light of what we've all seen happen across the last several weeks and years, but teachers generally, including Black male teachers, are bringing valuable qualities that ultimately enrich the classroom environment. And all of this is playing a role, right, our value on these qualities into their decisions to leave or stay in the profession. And so one goal I have is to ensure and play a role in us not entering a teaching crisis where we don't have enough teachers in the classroom or have enough teachers of color to show up in the classrooms as well. And so here I am getting ready to share with you all the results of this initiative. And my goal here is to elevate these findings to audiences that can put them into action across the country, which I hope is why y'all are here. So here we go. I hope you chug a little bit of coffee and let's talk about some of the insights from when we surveyed male teachers of color. So taking a look at this first insight. Part of the reason that we want to recruit and retain Black male teachers is because of an instinct that these teachers bring unique value to the job. You know, an instinct. There's some qualitative work on this too. And our first finding seems to quantify this instinct. So this slide is showing us that Black male teachers report spending an average of 4.6 hours a week tutoring students and 5.4 hours mentoring students outside of class time. And that is more than any other teacher demographic. And Black male teachers also report having more students hanging out in their classrooms outside of regular class time. And that is more than teachers of any other demographic. Later, we're gonna sort of quickly talk about the invisible tax, right? The burdens placed on teachers of color. But what surprised us and really what relieved us is that teachers who were reporting these higher numbers or greater student engagement on these questions were no more likely, slightly less likely, in fact, to report burnout, which is somewhat counterintuitive that spending more time outside of class time, outside of your already big workload and having more students hang out still did not point in this instance to teachers talking about more burnout. And here's another finding that fascinated us. I'm curious, again, I can't see the chat just yet, if anyone here is an HBCU grad or at least loves the HBCU experience and what it offers. Graduates of historically Black colleges and universities showed the greatest engagement with students of all. And we showed this finding to Dr. Michael Lomax and his team at the United Negro College Fund, or the UNCF, and they see this finding as the quantification of what they call the HBCU effect. And that is proof that if you went to a college where the environment was affirming and Black professors mentored you, that you were much more likely then to pay it forward and to seize opportunities to be a mentor yourself. So for time's sake, even though I'm a really proud Spelman graduate, again, I'm married to a Howard alum. In fact, both my parents who are educators, they attended HBCUs, Hampton and St. Aug. We're not going to sit with this finding, and I'm going to dovetail it instead into two other survey discoveries. So we found that teachers of color are more likely to have entered the teaching profession because they wanted to teach a curriculum that affirms the identities of students of color. And Black male teachers were more likely than any other group to cite this as their motivation to become an educator. So not just an exciting piece of being a teacher as a part of what you love, but here, what is the reason I became an educator? To teach and to affirm the identities of my students of color. Kind of an interesting finding. And then when we found a motivation driven even more by a teacher's age than by their race, that motivation is seeing teaching as social justice work. And I want to credit Sharif El-Mekki, and for those who are familiar with the Center for Black Educator Development, for really helping us to drill into the creation of this survey question as he and his team at the center are thinking about this question of the advocacy and social justice aspect of teaching. So of teachers who started teaching after 2010, 62% strongly agreed that I became a teacher because I see teaching as social justice work. So for teachers who entered the profession before then, fewer were motivated by this idea of teaching as social justice work. And if you can for a second imagine a local or a national teaching recruitment campaign or districts that are looking to say, hey, I'm looking to increase the number of maybe male teachers of color, or increase the number of teachers who are committed to the cause of teaching, knowing that certain teachers are drawn to the profession for this reason might inform the framing for recruitment campaigns. And so when we get to discussion in just a moment, I'm curious to hear how folks are thinking about ways to sort of elevate these findings in ways that move the needle within districts, and of course, move the needle in policy, or maybe even move the needle in how we approach getting more teachers into the profession. And finally, let's talk about when someone is inspired to become a teacher. The data show that gender is the strongest predictor here, more so than race, with male teachers of all racial identities deciding much later in life to pursue teaching as a profession. I'm super intrigued by this, considering I have a son, he's 5, and a daughter who's 2. But I think about what does it mean to see yourself in the teaching profession? Is it that folks don't see themselves young, do boys see themselves in the teaching profession later in life? Like, what is it? What's the driving factor here? I won't suppose or provide a hypothesis, but I think we can certainly flesh out some thinking around campaigns to drill into moving the needle here and finding folks getting earlier and more engaged in the profession earlier. And I have just 1 or 2 more slides, and we'll talk about teaching conditions and how that's affecting retention. The survey seems to confirm that are really what data has been telling us for years, which is that unfortunately, Black teachers expect to leave the teaching profession sooner than teachers of all other identities. Let's get under the hood for that. The survey found that across genders, Black teachers are 3 times more likely than other teachers of color to report that because of my race, I am expected to discipline students of color, and about twice as likely to report being expected to do extra mentoring of students of color, to teach other colleagues about racism, and to teach students about racism. And so thinking about this question of invisible tax, this perhaps is pointing to a quantification of what teachers are telling us about expectations for them. And male teachers of color also agreed that race and ethnic differences between students and teachers are creating a tension in their school. They were more than 3 times as likely to also share and agree that because of their race, they're expected to be the school liaison to families of color. And some might call or might say that these findings are quantifying what John King, who's the former US Secretary of Ed under Obama, calls the invisible tax, right, that educators of color pay, that this is an expectation. I know I am a liaison for the Black family because I am the Black teacher. And then there's burnout. And the data seem to tell us that Black male teachers actually reported the lowest burnout rate at 39%, compared to, for example, 55% of Black female teachers. Now, for those listening in, I'm sure we could step outside of this and think of all different levels of burnout during the pandemic, et cetera, that different folks carry. There's a lot of research on mothers and women and teaching profession. And I was really surprised to see this stat. And when we discussed this finding with Dr. Travis Bristol, he shared a hypothesis on like, why are we noticing what's happening here? And he shared that perhaps the language of I am burnt out isn't how he, a Black man, a Black teacher, or men of color in his community speak about all their shouldering in communities and households and so forth. So he pointed to perhaps the data here is actually pointing to other ideas or factors like toxic masculinity and discussing masculinity or discussing burnout in a different way, or maybe even that describing burnout is actually the wrong phrasing to have been included in this survey. So a bit of vulnerability in hearing Dr. Bristol share, perhaps something we should explore in future surveys. And okay, I'm going to end on a bright note, and I hope you'll gear up to ask me questions or to talk to one another about what you're learning here. And if there's anything that we learned today, or maybe can reinforce in this survey, it is that male teachers of color and Black men specifically are just really paramount to public school classrooms. We know here from this slide that there was one universal finding when we drilled, and it was that having a great teacher actually inspires future great teachers. So I will end with some gratitude in that I am grateful to all of our dozens of peer organizations and advisors in this space who helped to craft the survey and kick the tires on the research. I'm grateful to all of you for tuning in today and who really are amongst our partners in this work. And these findings are helpful when they sit within the pages of the study, because they quantify and give evidence to some of the experiences of these educators. But it's only when we lift these insights from the pages and begin to deploy them within school districts across the country that we begin to move the needle. And both my mom and my dad are teachers. My dad is a Black male educator of more than 20 years. He retires at the end of this month. My mom just retired 2 days ago. Congrats, Mom. As of Monday, with 39 years in special education, working with kids on the autism spectrum and speech therapy. And I just want to salute them and of course, all of you in the sector for all you do and to say thank you. So thank you for tuning in, but more importantly, thank you for putting these findings to work so that we can better recruit and retain and empower Black male educators and of course, educators across the sector. If y'all are up for it, I want to dig in and I want to ask questions. And of course, if you want to nerd out in the full report, it is here on this slide. Okay, Lisa, thank you so much. I'd love to have questions and open it up for folks to engage.
I don't know if you saw in chat, but Kathleen asked if she can get access to your data. Is that a possibility?
Oh my goodness, you got it. In fact, I think I just stopped a screen share, right? So y'all are still seeing each other or hearing, not the screen. In fact, right now what I'll do is I will drop into the chat the link to the full report.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. I will do that as we speak.
What other questions or comments do you all have for Steen? And personally, I just wanted to say, I think this is the first time I've ever heard data reported on K-12 Black male teachers, specifically as a group. So just that awareness that data set has been missing from my understanding of teachers and teacher education, which I've done for 25 years is, thank you so much for sharing today. That was really powerful.
Thank you all. And of course, I resist the urge. I say thank you, but then also I like ricochet that back to so many of folks in the community, because there's so much about the work of race equity that's so community-based, right? We could not have gotten the survey questions right without having equity advisors and fellow educators really to say, that's not how I talk about this, or to have Dr. Bristol say, wait a minute, you're missing a question on invisible tax. So I'm grateful to the community that's bringing this to life and really the thousands of teachers that we continue to drill into. So thank you for that. And I see a question in the chat. Lisa asked a question. Can I dive right into that one, Lisa?
Sure.
Oh, Lisa. Other Lisa, do you want to come off mute to share a question and give any context to it, or do you want me to read it out for you?
Sure, I can talk. So I'm just still stuck on those burnout findings, and I really appreciate you sharing Dr. Bristol's kind of interpretation of maybe we're using the wrong language. So I just wondered, are there any plans to kind of dig in and follow up on those findings to explore those a little bit more? I put in the chat that I'm baffled and intrigued.
Color me baffled and intrigued too, Lisa. In fact, I identify, I'm she, her, I identify as woman, I am a mother as well. And I tell you, when I read the finding, and if folks are in that link, you can sort of scroll all the way down and you'll see a link. I was like, I told you women are more burnt out. Like, I just knew. I was like, I had a whole theory. I was like, that's it. We win the burnout journey. And then to have a bunch of men around a table say, actually, well, I need the language. And so I think what's next with respect to drilling into this idea of burnout, which is becoming an incredibly, not even becoming, but continuing to be so incredibly important, I think, on the other end of the pandemic of, sort of when we enter more an endemic of what we see with respect to folks, especially teachers, telling us about whether or not burnout is the reason they leave, or addressing burnout in long-term care is the reason they'll stay. So that's really a non-answer to your question, Lisa, of what will we do besides potentially work with Dr. Bristol on a part 2. We're also looking at some part 2 or part 3 and 4 of this work, where we begin to drill into what are the insights that are specific to other groups of educators that are not Black men. So we set out to explore the experiences of male educators of color and Black men's experiences, roles. But then we also have findings on Hispanic and Latino educators and Latinx educators. And we also had findings right to the top for Black female educators. So there's so much more for us to unearth. And I think you're getting at a cool idea around specifics on teacher burnout. I hope that answers your question, Lisa. Do you have a reflection on that?
No, thank you. I'm very interested to see what else comes out in parts 2, 3, 4.
Indeed. Thanks for your question. And Kathleen, you have a question. Do you want to come off mute, or shall I read it for you?
Oh, I can come off mute. I just want to make sure I feel like there's some lawn people waiting to gear up outside my window. So I'll say it fast. So with this information, what will you do with this? Are there things that DonorsChoose are, besides disseminating, which is of course really vital, but what kind of changes will you make, do you think?
My goodness, this is the $1 million question. So part of our initial launch of this initiative, even beyond I See Me till now, is this question of what does it mean for us to move the needle, right? And for us to be a part of the community moving the needle. On the one hand, we recognize that our unique value proposition at DonorsChoose is that we have access to the data, the teachers, and the surveys, right? So we have the ability, when there are questions in the sector, for us to ask of teachers. If we want a real pulse on what's happening in classrooms today, we can ask teachers a survey today, and we could actually get an answer to the public quickly. And that is part of what we see as the value of listening to and learning from educators. But as I think your question suggests, I am not comfortable with that just being where we land. In fact, part of our work with districts, we work with thousands of districts across the country because they have teachers creating classroom projects on DonorsChoose. When we launched this initiative, we invited I think it's I don't even know what percentage. I mean, we sent emails to thousands, tens of thousands of our district contacts to get them at the initiative launch to be able to put into action in their district some of the survey findings here. And I'll give one example. For example, if you actually are in that link I sent and scroll to the bottom, you'll notice that there's a couple of folks, David Banks, the Chancellor of New York City Public Schools, actually said, wait a minute, if we know the power of students seeing themselves, we knew this and we're committed to education, but now we actually have some data to point to why it's really important for us to be thinking about recruiting and retaining Black men. I'm going to take this survey and I'm going to make sure it gets to the right folks in the equity or diversity and retention departments of New York City Public Schools. And we're going to be committed to ensuring we have benchmarks that we need. And so I think, Kathleen, part of this is getting districts engaged with this work, and elevating it to districts is a big part of our strategy in deploying this beyond the pages of the survey and the study.
Christina, we are coming to the end of our time, and I see that Tamiko has her hand raised. Would you like to ask our final question, Tamiko?
Oh, sorry, Tamiko.
No, I took it down. I feel like all of the stuff has been super helpful. I was just smiling and just saying thank you all for doing the work because I think it is very important work. I did have one question about one of the pieces. I can't remember the slide, but it was something where the identification of the year of when people became teaching. And I think one thing I'm wondering about is the year conducive to seeing a person of color in front of you as an educator? And I don't know if that's, like data that you all have found. But I know like with the I see me, like, is that, when, like if you see a African-American or a person of color as your teacher, when you are in elementary school, does it give you the sense to think that way when you are there? That's another part or another question.
The data nerd in me, I am taking down this question because we did ask the question of survey respondents when they first saw themselves and their teachers. And so we actually could cut the data of that question against that of the other to actually learn if there is any correlation to the two. It wouldn't necessarily be causation, but we could see if there's a correlation. And so with that in mind, I am now going to add this to the growing document of all the questions we want to continue to ask within the survey. So thank you for asking. And if you indeed want to reach out, I'll be sure to follow up to share with you what we learned.
And with that, I am going to bring our session to a close. Christina, I have to jump into our next session that starts at 9. It's been amazing. Sorry, Steen. It's been amazing having you here. Thank you so much. The data was super powerful. Really glad that an organization like DonorsChoose that's so committed to classroom teachers. I participated in DonorsChoose. I've encouraged other teachers I know to participate, and always however I can help get the word out, share the data, however we can support, please let us know.
I'm like lighting up the chat with just gratitude and I can't even type in. I'll just say thank you for allowing the platform here. And also this showcase is incredible. And you're going to see me now in a bunch of other sessions nerding out. So thank you for having me. I'm going to join you. I'm going to jump into the next session as well. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. And I hope to see others of you in the audience in our other sessions today. And thank you all for being here.
Incredible. Thank you all.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.